Today we have a crazy revenge story of getting your own brother jailed. We'll get into that in a bit, but first, my spoiled elder sister wanted to walk down the aisle on my wedding day? Yeah, right. I come from a family of 4. My dad, mom, an elder sister, and me. I was the younger sister, always living in the shadow of my older sister, Emily. She was the golden child from as far back as I can remember. Our parents, especially my mother, idolized her. Emily could do no wrong in their eyes, while I was just there. More of an afterthought than anything else. My parents were the kind of people who needed everything to be perfect, but only on the surface. They craved admiration from others, and Emily was their ticket to that. She was beautiful, outgoing, and knew exactly how to play their game. Me? I was the quiet one, the one who blended into the background. It wasn't that I didn't try to be noticed, it was that my efforts were never enough for them. I remember vividly the countless times my achievements were brushed aside. In elementary school, when I won a regional spelling bee, my mother's only comment was, "That's nice, dear, but did you see how well Emily performed in her ballet recital?" That was how it always went. Emily's minor successes were met with applause and celebration, while my hard work barely warranted a nod. As I grew older, emotional neglect became the norm in our house. My parents were so wrapped up in Emily's life that they barely noticed me. They didn't ask about my day, didn't show up to my school events, and didn't bother to learn who my friends were. But I learned to be self-reliant, not to need their approval. I found joy in my own successes, even if they didn't. Emily was cunning and knew how to work our parents to her advantage. She was spoiled, manipulative, and always managed to get what she wanted. Once, I spent weeks working on a science project that won first place in the district. Emily claimed she helped me, turning what should have been my moment into hers. But I kept my resentment hidden, telling myself that one day they would see me for who I was, that they would regret treating me like I didn't matter. In high school, I threw myself into studies, books became my refuge, a world where I could excel without Emily overshadowing me. My hard work paid off, and I earned a full scholarship to college. It was my ticket out of the suffocating environment that was my home. When I told my parents about the scholarship, their response was lukewarm at best. "That's nice," my father said, barely looking up from his newspaper. My mother's only concern was how I'd manage without them nearby. They didn't understand that I was already used to being on my own, even while living under their roof. Emily, of course, found a way to make it about her. She said, I could have gotten a scholarship too if I'd focused more on school," she said, as if my achievement was just a fluke. With each passing year, my resentment grew. I realized that no matter what I did, I would never be enough for them. They would always see Emily as the star of the family and me as just the shadow in the background. But I wasn't going to let that define me. I was biding my time, waiting for the perfect moment to show them that I wasn't someone to be underestimated. I met Daniel during my sophomore year of college, and from the moment we started talking, I knew he was different from anyone I'd ever known. He was kind, genuine, and most importantly, he saw me. Not the shadow I'd always been in my family's eyes, but the real me, intelligent, capable, and worthy of love. We connected instantly, and as we spent more time together, our relationship blossomed into something deep and meaningful. Daniel quickly became aware of the toxic environment I'd grown up in. I didn't have to tell him everything. He could see it in the way I hesitated to talk about my family, in the way I downplayed my achievements, and in the guarded way I responded when he complimented me. But instead of letting my family's behavior drive a wedge between us, he made it his mission to show me what real support and love looked like. With him, I felt safe, valued, and cherished for the first time in my life. When Daniel proposed to me, it was one of the happiest moments of my life. He planned everything perfectly. A quiet, intimate evening just for the two of us. He knew I didn't need a grand spectacle, just a sincere promise that we'd face the world together. We decided to announce our engagement to my family during a dinner at my parents' house. I wasn't expecting much from them, but I hoped, foolishly perhaps, that they'd at least be happy for me. Instead, their reaction was predictably lukewarm. My mother barely managed to smile, and my father simply nodded, his focus shifting back to Emily, who of course found a way to steer the conversation back to herself. "It's about time you found someone," she said with a condescending smile. "But don't you think it's a bit sudden?" Despite their indifference, I didn't let it dampen my spirits. Daniel and I were getting married and nothing could take that away from me. A week after the engagement announcement, my parents insisted on having a formal meeting with Daniel and me to discuss the wedding plans. I knew better than to expect anything good from this, but I went along, hoping to avoid unnecessary conflict. The four of us sat in the living room, the atmosphere tense and awkward. My parents exchanged glances and I could tell they were building up to something. Finally, my mother spoke. "Your father and I have been thinking," she began, her tone deceptively sweet. "Since Emily never had the chance to have her own wedding, we think it would be nice, fair even, if she got to walk down the aisle first at your wedding." I stared at her, trying to process the absurdity of what she was suggesting. "You want Emily to walk down the aisle first? In a wedding dress? At my wedding?" I repeated, hoping I'd misunderstood. My father chimed in as if it were the most reasonable thing in the world. "It's only right. She's the eldest and she's had a rough time. It's just a small gesture to make her feel special." I was speechless. They had always put Emily first, but this was beyond anything I could have imagined. I looked over at Daniel, expecting him to be as outraged as I was, but instead, I saw a flicker of something else in his eyes. Amusement, perhaps, or maybe something more calculating? Daniel leaned forward, a calm smile on his face. "That's an interesting idea," he said, his voice steady. "I can see how much it means to you. Let's discuss how we can make it work." I nearly choked on my shock, but then I caught the glint in his eye, the subtle hint that this was part of a bigger plan. I didn't know what he was up to, but I trusted him. If he was willing to play along with my parents' ridiculous demand, there had to be a good reason. As we left my parents' house that evening, Daniel squeezed my hand and whispered, "Don't worry, we've got this. Let's give them what they want on our terms." It was in that moment that I realized Daniel was not only the love of my life, but also the perfect partner in crime. Together, we were about to turn the tables on my family in a way they'd never see coming. After that ridiculous request from my parents, Daniel and I had a lot to talk about. Once we were back home, I finally let out all the frustration I'd been holding in. "Can you believe them? They actually want Emily to walk down the aisle at my wedding." Daniel, however, was surprisingly calm. He took my hands, his expression thoughtful. "I know it's insane, but I think we can use this to our advantage. What if we play along? Let them think they're getting what they want, but in reality, we'll be setting them up for a fall." I blinked at him, the anger slowly giving way to curiosity. "What are you suggesting?" "We agree to their demands," he said, a sly smile forming on his lips. "But we make sure that every decision we make works in our favor. We'll have them pay for everything, the venue, the dress, the catering. We'll give them the illusion of control while we plan the wedding of our dreams." The more he explained, the more sense it made. My parents were so desperate to please Emily that they would do anything to make her feel special. They wouldn't think twice about spending money if they believed it would give her the spotlight. And that's exactly what Daniel and I were going to exploit. The very next day, I called my parents and agreed to their outrageous request. They were thrilled, believing they had won yet again. I could practically hear the self-satisfaction in my mother's voice as she started discussing the plans. "We'll have to find the perfect dress for Emily, something truly spectacular," she gushed. "And, of course, the venue must be grand enough to accommodate both of you." Daniel and I played our parts perfectly. We pretended to be on board with everything, nodding along as my parents rattled off their demands, but behind the scenes, we were working on our plans. Over the next few weeks, Daniel and I met with wedding planners, caterers, and decorators. We made sure that every detail of the wedding was tailored to our tastes, not Emily's. We chose a venue that was elegant but intimate. Far from the ostentatious affair my parents were envisioning, the guest list was carefully curated, filled with people who mattered to us, our friends, mentors, and those who had supported our relationship from the beginning. When it came to the wedding dress, I played along with my parents' obsession with Emily. I let them take her shopping for the most elaborate, expensive gown they could find. Meanwhile, I worked with a designer to create a dress that was simple, elegant, and uniquely mine. It was a far cry from the gaudy monstrosity Emily would be wearing, but that was the point. I wanted her to stand out, but not in the way she expected. As the wedding day approached, the tension in the house grew. My parents were so focused on making Emily the star of the show that they didn't notice the subtle ways we were undermining their plans. The seating arrangements, the music, the decorations, everything was designed to highlight the love Daniel and I shared, not Emily's desperate need for attention. Daniel and I had planned every detail, and that included the security. We had hired a discreet but firm team who understood exactly what needed to be done. As the guests began to arrive, everything seemed to be going according to my parents' plan. Emily was ready, waiting for her big moment, unaware of the surprise that awaited her. When Emily, dressed in her stunning expensive gown, finally approached the venue, the security team stepped forward. "I'm sorry, miss," one of the guards said politely but firmly, "but you're not on the guest list for entry." "What do you mean I'm not on the list?" Emily's voice, usually so controlled, was now tinged with panic and confusion. "We've been instructed not to allow anyone in a wedding dress other than the bride," the guard explained calmly. The shock on Emily's face was priceless. She tried to push her way through, demanding that they let her in, but the guards held their ground. My parents, who had been chatting with guests inside, soon heard the commotion and rushed to the entrance, but it was too late. The security team was resolute, and the scene outside was starting to draw attention. Meanwhile, inside the venue, everything was going off without a hitch. The guests were seated, the music was playing softly, and the atmosphere was nothing short of magical. No one inside had any idea about the drama unfolding just outside the doors. As far as they were concerned, this was the perfect wedding. As Daniel and I danced our first dance as husband and wife, I felt a sense of satisfaction that was long overdue. For one, I was the one who mattered, the one who was truly seen. My parents' attempts to overshadow me had failed, and in their failure, they had unwittingly given me the wedding of my dreams. Honestly, with how obsessed the parents were, I'm surprised that they didn't try to extend some hyper control over every little detail. I'm surprised they allowed such a large window for OP and their partner to control things. If they wanted to hijack this wedding, they really screwed up the whole process. Also, hi, I'm Steven, and if you guys enjoy crazy stories of revenge, it would be amazing if you left a like or left a review if you're listening to my podcast. That said, our next story is How I Made My Brother's Bully Pay for His Actions. My name is Barry, and this is my revenge story against a bully who refused to stop bullying my younger brother while we were in high school. I've always been protective of my little brother, and still am even now, though we're both grown and life has made us drift apart. He's only 2 years younger than me, but he's always needed a bit of extra care. You see, he has OCD, obsessive compulsive disorder, and people don't always understand him, but I do. Growing up, I learned to see his quirks as part of what makes him special. He counts things in his head, makes sure objects are in the right place, and sometimes worries about things more than other people. But to me, he's the kindest, most thoughtful person I know. From a young age, I decided I'd protect him no matter what. I wasn't going to let anyone hurt him or make him feel small. I would stand up for him no matter the cost. That's just what big brothers are for, right? But not everyone saw the need to let my brother be unique in his own special way. One guy in particular, let's call him Derek, was the worst of them all. Derek was the type of guy who thought he was better than everyone. He came from money and he made sure everyone knew it. Flashy clothes, expensive cars, and a smug attitude that made me want to punch him sometimes. He was tall, good-looking, and had that grin that just screamed trouble. Derek's family was loaded, and he never let anyone forget it. He flaunted his wealth at every chance, rubbing it in people's faces like it made him better than us, and when he found out about my brother's OCD, that's when he really turned nasty. He started teasing my brother in front of others, calling him names, making fun of the way he arranged things, and even pretending to fix stuff just to watch my brother get upset. It broke my heart to see my brother crumble under Derek's taunts, but Derek didn't care. He saw my brother's pain as entertainment, and that made my blood boil. I wanted to stop him, but I had to wait for the right moment. I needed to make sure he'd pay for all the damage he caused, not just to my brother, but to me too. He would do anything to make sure my brother was uncomfortable just for laughs, and this was the most annoying thing, actually. The final straw came one afternoon during lunch at school. My brother and I were sitting together just talking about our day when Derek decided to make his move. He swaggered over to our table, grinning like he owned the place. He picked up one of my brother's notebooks, the one he always kept neat and organized, and flipped through it, messing up all the pages on purpose. "Look at this, can't even write without everything being perfect, huh?" Derek sneered, tossing the notebook back onto the table. My brother's face fell, his hands shaking as he tried to straighten the pages. I could see how much it hurt him, but Derek wasn't done. "What's the matter, gonna cry? Oh wait, you're probably counting to calm yourself down, right?" 1, 2, 3, Derek mocked, laughing louder and louder. A few other kids nearby snickered, and my brother's face flushed with embarrassment. His eyes were tearing up and he just froze, unable to respond. That was it. I couldn't take it anymore. Something snapped inside me, watching my brother, who was always so kind and gentle, get humiliated like that. It made me furious. Derek had crossed the line too many times, but this time was different. He wasn't just teasing, he was breaking my brother's spirit. I clenched my fists under the table, trying to stay calm. I couldn't just lash out. I needed to be smart about this. I'd been practicing card tricks for years, ever since I was a kid. I'd gotten good, really good. Cheating at cards was second nature to me now, and no one could ever tell I was doing it. Then it hit me, Derek was always bragging about his poker nights. He loved to gamble, loved to show off his money and act like he was unbeatable. But what if he wasn't? That's when I knew how I'd make him pay. His weakness was his pride and his wallet. He thought he was invincible because of his money, and I was going to take it all away from him. I'd use the one skill I had that Derek could never see coming. He wouldn't even realize what was happening until it was too late. I'd beat him at his own game, and he would lose everything. I couldn't just confront him. He would deny everything and act like the victim. No, I needed a plan that would hit him where it hurt most: his pride and his money. I started by doing some digging. Derek always bragged about his high-stakes poker games, and it wasn't hard to find out the details. He played every Saturday night at some fancy club with a few other rich guys. They weren't just casual games either, they played for serious money. I spent the next few days studying everything I could about those games. Who played, what the stakes were, and most importantly, how much Derek was willing to risk. I found out that he often bet large sums of money just to show off, convinced he couldn't lose. Seems quite ironic that his arrogance was going to be his downfall. I needed help, so I called up my two closest friends, Jake and Sam. They knew about Derek and had seen what he'd done to my brother. When I explained my plan, they were all in. They would play in the game and I would sit as the dealer, making sure the cards worked in our favor without anyone noticing. I spent hours practicing sleight of hand tricks, making sure everything was perfect. I would rig the deck, deal the cards just right, and give my friends winning hands while making Derek think he had a shot. I even rehearsed scenarios in case something went wrong, knowing I had to be ready for anything. By the end of the week, I was confident. Everything was set and Derek wouldn't know what hit him. His luck was about to run out. When the night of the game arrived, I was almost moved to cancel the whole thing. Try as I might, there would always be bad people in the world, and doing this against this guy wouldn't really affect the other wicked people my brother might face on in life. However, I pushed through it because it was revenge and one must play the hand that is dealt to them. Derek and his group of wealthy friends were already in the poker room, laughing and sipping on expensive drinks like they owned the world. The poker table sat in the middle of the room, surrounded by soft lighting and the faint hum of jazz music playing in the background. I was the dealer tonight, which meant everything was in my control. I took a deep breath and sat down, ready to make sure things went exactly according to plan. As the first few hands went by, I dealt carefully, making sure to give Derek decent cards, but nothing too powerful. Meanwhile, my friends Jake and Sam were getting these slightly better hands, just enough to keep them in the game. I could see the confidence in Derek's eyes growing with every round. He thought he had it all under control, but that was the trick. I was making sure he stayed just close enough to winning without ever actually getting there. The stakes grew higher and so did the tension in the room. Derek, ever the arrogant fool, kept pushing his bets, convinced that his luck was about to turn around. He couldn't quit now, not with so much money on the table. The deeper he got into the game, the more frustrated he became. Every time he thought he had a winning hand, Jake or Sam would quietly lay down a slightly better one, and Derek's stack of chips got smaller and smaller. "Come on, one more round," Derek said, his voice starting to edge with desperation. His confidence was slipping, but his pride wouldn't let him back down. He was sure that if he just kept playing, he would win it all back. That's when I knew the moment had come. The final hand arrived and I could feel the tension buzzing in the air. Derek was sweating now, but he still couldn't walk away. He'd already lost a massive amount, but he wasn't ready to quit. Not yet. With a shaky hand, he shoved everything, his entire savings, into the pot. This was it, the big one. "I'm going all in," Derek said, grinning wildly as if he'd already won. The cards were dealt, and I made sure Derek had a monster hand. It was strong enough to make him feel unbeatable, but not strong enough to actually win. Jake, sitting across from him, glanced at his cards and then met my eyes briefly. I knew what he had, a hand that would crush Derek's without question. The room went silent as Derek revealed his cards. His grin stretched wide as he laid down his straight flush, confident it was the winning hand. But then, slowly, Jake turned over his cards, revealing a royal flush. Derek's face fell. His eyes widened in disbelief as the reality of the situation hit him like a freight train. He'd lost, not just the game, but everything. His entire savings gone in a single hand. The room stayed eerily quiet for a moment as Derek sat there, stunned, unable to speak. I leaned back in my chair, watching as the weight of his loss sank in. He looked like he might be sick. The mighty Derek, so sure of himself, had just been taken down in the cruelest way possible. The game was over, and with it, Derek's life as he knew it. Derek sat there for what felt like forever, staring blankly at the empty table. His face was pale, his hands trembling. He had just lost everything, his entire fortune, on that last hand. It was like watching someone realize their whole life had been built on sand and the tide had just washed it all away. I watched as he tried to regain his composure, but the look in his eyes told me he knew the truth. There was no coming back from this. He mumbled something under his breath, a weak attempt to save face, but the desperation in his voice was impossible to miss. He stumbled out of the poker room, no longer the confident, arrogant man who had walked in. By the next morning, word had spread fast. Derek was completely broke, and soon, everything he had left was slipping away. But it wasn't just the kids at school who found out. His father, a stern and well-respected businessman, got wind of the situation. He wasn't pleased. I heard through friends of his close friends that his dad had been furious. He wasn't just mad about the money Derek had lost, but about the sheer embarrassment it brought to their family. His father was known to be strict, and when he found out his son had gambled away everything, especially after all the privilege and wealth Derek had grown up with, he lost it. I imagine their home wasn't a pleasant place to be that night. Some said Derek's dad took away all his freedoms. No car, no spending money, no trust. He would have to work off his debt to the family for a long time, and I know this because his dad made sure everyone knew about it. Till this day, he never figured out that I was the master planner in his downfall, but he did leave my brother alone. I imagine that he had enough problems and debt to settle than to bully someone who did nothing for him. I mean, I'm not gonna lie, I'm surprised the one thing Derek didn't do in OP's story was actually accuse or attack OP as the dealer. I feel like I would be completely irrational if I were in Derek's shoes and I just lost my life fortune in poker chips. I'd be like, come on, let me see the deck. Let me look at everything. This can't be right. Our next story is, I told my brother and got him in jail. Not a lot of people know that my brother Jack, not his real name, now 33, is in jail. Not a lot of people know that I have a brother. The only people who know about my brother are those who grew up in the same neighborhood I did. I have 3 sisters, 2 are older, 1 is younger than me, and my brother is 5 years older than my little sister. Now, this story isn't even about my younger brother being in jail. That's not the gag. The gag is that I ratted him out to the police. Wondering why one would put their brother in jail and still be proud of it? Well, here's the backstory. My parents moved into a new neighborhood when my oldest sister was 5. My mother had convinced my father that the new neighborhood was their best chance at giving us a good life, even though we had very little. It wasn't the safest neighborhood, but it was safer than where they were coming from. My paternal aunt had another theory though. She told us that my mom convinced my dad to move so he could cut off his mom's apron strings. My dad had a peculiar relationship with his mother, but my mother thought she was too controlling. As expected, my mom and her mother-in-law did not get along. Anyway, my parents had a turbulent marriage. My mom blamed my dad's mom for that, but I think my dad just didn't love my mom very much. They would separate and get back together very often, and usually it was my dad running back to my mom whenever he got into some kind of trouble, usually financial. My mom would help out and then he would stay home for a while, get her pregnant, and leave again. That was the rinse and repeat situation until my dad met someone who had more money than my mom. It had always been my dad's dream to be with a woman who paid for his living, and since the woman was willing to be that woman, Dad moved in and stuck with her. When my youngest sister was 11, my dad got a proper divorce from my mom and married the woman he was living with. My mom was heartbroken because she just always thought that my dad would leave the woman and come back again. She stayed by herself and continued to stew in the traumatic relationship she had with my dad. It was so bad that she lost control for a while and couldn't parent us properly. The parenting job was left to us kids and my 2 older sisters. They worked jobs to support our family and made sure that my youngest sister's homework was done. My little sister and I were good kids. We had problems at home, but we had good grades and always looked tidy in school. My brother, on the other hand, was disrespectful and never took anything seriously. Not school and not a job. He was rude to our older sisters, hit the second one on numerous occasions, and tried to hit the first one once. My mom never called him to order or even attempted to. She just let him do whatever, or she reported him to my dad, who would drive over to straighten him up. My brother would behave himself well for a while, but then he would go back to being a nuisance in the house. When my dad died, he became a lot worse. He was very destructive. He would steal from me, my mom, my sisters, and even guests. It was horrible. One day, my oldest sister decided that she was moving out of the house and the neighborhood. She had had enough of my brother and was tired of being unable to do anything about his behavior, so she got her best friend to pick her up and they drove away. Now, I must admit that when she moved out, I was mad at my sister. I could not believe that she abandoned us. I told her she was mean and evil and said so many horrible things to her. She had probably had enough of all of us because she did not care. She just got in her best friend's car and they drove off. We all hated and blamed her for leaving, but my brother hated her the most. A year later, I wish my sister had taken me with her. I wanted to apologize, but she didn't want to talk to anyone. My brother's behavior got a lot worse, and since I was the oldest in my family, my second older sister got married and left, I had to pick up after everyone. He would make a mess in the kitchen, the bathroom, and everywhere else. His grades were woeful, but that wasn't all. He bullied his classmates and was disrespectful to his teachers. He got expelled eventually for planning, alongside some boys in school, to beat up one of their classmates. My mom tried to talk to the school principal so Jack could get a high school diploma at least. He was already in his senior year, but the principal had had enough of my brother's horrible behavior. My mom tried to see if he could get into another school, but he refused. He said he was done with school and would rather do other stuff. He said he was going to be a rapper and began going around the neighborhood trying to find someone who would listen to him rap. He met some guys who let them join their group, but they kicked him out when he stole from one of them. My mom was frustrated. She took him to her cousin. The said cousin owned a barber shop and he promised to give my brother a job at the barber shop and help set him straight. The barber shop was Jack's longest job. He worked with my mom's cousin for almost a year and seemed to be making progress. While he was a dutiful apprentice at work, Jack was still horrible at home. He felt so entitled to everyone's time, attention, and labor. He was mostly calm, but sometimes he would throw a major tantrum and hit someone or destroy something. We lived in fear of him in the house. Even my mom, who would always make excuses for his bad behavior and apologize on his behalf, lived in fear of him. My brother got angry about the littlest things. If he came home and there was nothing to eat, he got mad about that. He was always mad when someone complained about stuff that he had stolen from them. He was still stealing from us, and he got mad whenever someone tried to talk to him about his behavior. You know what's also funny? My brother was very disrespectful to my mom, but each time I or my sister got into an argument with my mom, he would hit us. Each time I tried to leave the house because I was sick of having a little brother who beat me up all the time, stole from me without consequences, and made a big mess for me to clean, my mom would get mad at me for trying to leave. She would remind me of her health and beg me to stay. I continued to stay and tolerate my brother's abuse. After a year of working at the barbershop, Jack quit and joined a gang in the neighborhood. It was bad, but it was also a relief because he was barely ever in the house. He started to make money from selling drugs, and that kept him happy and busy. He still made a mess in the house and made my little sister clean up after him. Despite him making a decent amount of money at the time, he never contributed to the family's upkeep. He spent his money on old cars and was always at the local club. We don't know what for sure happened, but I suspect that he stole from someone in the gang, and they got very pissed and tortured him. He returned home with bruises all over and was barely even able to walk. At this time, my second older sister had moved into the house next to us because she needed help with her kids. Her husband had left her for another woman, so she was heartbroken and could barely get herself to do anything. We all knew how my dad leaving my mom really broke her, so I suggested that she move back in with us. Luckily, our neighbors were moving out, so she spoke with the landlady and moved in. My niece and nephew were in our house all that time, and that somehow did not sit well with my brother, who had gotten used to being the center of attention. Nobody cared about his tantrums anymore. One day, Jack and two of his teenage friends robbed a grocery store together. From the CCTV footage that was shown on the news, my sisters and I knew that one of the robbers was my brother. They were wearing clown costumes and a mask, but we could tell. After the robbery, he stayed in his room for 2 weeks, trying to avoid getting recognized by anyone. If there was anything I knew about Jack, it was that he was deathly scared of prison. He was already used to a life where he did whatever he wanted, ate without having to contribute to the cooking or cleaning, and did whatever and got away with it. So going to prison would take all that privilege from him. Of course, none of us were going to rat him out to the police or anything. He was a criminal, but he was our brother and we tolerated him. Nobody was going to rat him out until one evening after my mom had made dinner for everyone, Jack started to yell that he was hungry. My mom told him that the food was ready and that she would fix him a plate soon. He continued yelling. She ignored him, called my niece and nephew to the dining table, and began fixing their plates. That enraged my brother since he always wanted to be prioritized. He started to yell loudly and hit the wall. My second older sister got pissed and threatened to call the police. The only time I have ever threatened to call the police on my brother was years ago, and my mom slapped me. My brother looked at my mom to see if she would panic and warn my sister not to, but my mom was busy watching my niece and nephew eat. He then got angry and tried to hit the wall again, but my sister picked up her phone and dared him to try it. On my way to work the next morning, I saw my brother outside making a call. From his tone, I could tell that he was talking to someone in authority, but I just walked away. Well, it turned out that my brother was making a call to social services and telling them that my niece and nephew were not in good hands because their mom was too depressed to raise them properly. He then lied that my sister injured her daughter on the arm when she was smoking. My niece indeed had an injury on her arm, but she sustained the injury before they even moved to the house next to us. She and her little brother were in the house playing when he pressed a lighter on her arm. Barely 2 days after I saw my brother making that call, social services came around and took my niece and nephew away. It was clear that my brother had made the call, and we all got very mad at him. My mom confronted him and he yelled at her, went into his room and slammed the door. You know what I did? On my way to work the next morning, I stopped by the police and made a report against my brother and his little friends who robbed the store. I was still at work when the police came and took him away. My sisters told me that my mom did not show concern when the police came for him. She didn't even look as the police took him away in handcuffs. My niece and nephew returned home after 2 weeks, but my sister was horrified at the thought of losing her kids. She never forgave my brother. The only person who visits my brother in jail is my mom. My sisters and I never do. I mean, I'm definitely glad that OP and their family got revenge and managed to get their niece and nephew back after getting unfairly reported, but I gotta say, considering what happened to the niece to get that injury, they definitely needed some kind of assistance watching those kids, and it's just kind of sad to hear about how dysfunctional this whole immediate family is. I guess you gotta at least give the mom credit for how much she does love her son despite all his warts. But with that being said, that's all the time we have for today. Now, if you want to hear another absolutely crazy revenge story, check out that video on the left. Or if you missed my latest video, check out that video on the right. That said, I'll see you all next time with some more stories.